Thank you so much for joining me tonight. My name is Erica Riesbeck, and I am the Associate Director of Admission at the University of Richmond. Tonight's presentation is all about writing the college essay. So for those of you out there that are seniors, this is probably front of your mind. Some of you may not be seniors, so we're going to actually get started today with a poll. I'm going to ask you to vote and let me know, who are you? Options being, are you a senior, junior, parent, counselor, or other? Please take a moment to let me know who you are. So I've launched the poll. We must have only invited seniors because almost everyone's a senior. So welcome. And for you parents, I'm glad that you're listening in to be able to help pass some advice and maybe do some proofreading for your students. All right, so here's the results. 94% of you are seniors. So my guess is you may be a little stressed out right now. I'm hoping that tonight I can give you a little bit of inside knowledge of what I experience on the college admissions side to hopefully help you when trying to figure out what you might write about. So one more poll. I'm curious how many of you seniors have actually written at least a draft of one college essay. So I'd like to know where you are in your process. So I think probably a little bit helpful that we were locked indoors for a long time. It seems like a lot of people already had a chance to write a draft of a college essay, and maybe you've even submitted one. So let's get started on the presentation tonight. So why in the world do we even ask you for an essay? What would be the purpose behind writing a college essay? In fact, some universities do not even require you to submit an essay. I know I myself might have submitted an application to a school just because there was no essay. Maybe not the best choice on selecting a future college. But for schools like Richmond, and particularly highly selective universities, we want to get to know you. And in a community like Richmond with only 3,000 undergraduates, we want to make sure that you're going to fit into our campus community, right? And so learning about you through the essay, your personality, it helps us to figure out your fits. So the college essay really does allow you to personalize your application, present how you write, your writing style, and then share with us some things like your ambitions and your experiences. It is really meant to allow you to, in essence, kind of brand yourself, right? You're given this opportunity, and really one of the limited opportunities in your application that you have full control over. It's also probably the part of the application you might dread the most. I think because it is this unknown, like what is the purpose? What should I share? And how should I share it? So the first thing I want to talk about are the types of prompts that you would see in a common application. These are similar in the coalition, so whether you're using the common application or coalition, very similar types of prompts. And I want to point out some of the important phrases that are used in these prompts, right? So the first one, some students have a background, identity, interest, or talent that is so meaningful they believe their application would be incomplete without it. If this sounds like you, then please share your story. Or discuss an accomplishment, event, or realization that sparked a period of personal growth and a new understanding of yourself or others. Talk about something, an idea, a topic that captivated you. Or of course, the final one that always exists, topic of your choice, of your own design. We really want to know what you think. And so one of the most important things that your essay should do is sound like you and be authentic. But then that begs the question, well, who am I, right? I think when you really start to find the right college for yourself, you're starting to ask these very important questions like, who am I? What is important to me? What are my values? It requires a certain amount of self-reflection, and that holds really true when you get to the part of writing your college essay. How do you encapsulate your entire self into less than 700 words? And that can seem pretty daunting. So I wanted to share with you tonight some of the essays that I've collected over my 15 years of reading college essays, just to give you some examples. I think it's always helpful to see what other students have submitted. And then we'll go through some advice and tips, as well as providing some resources that you can use after this workshop. So I pulled out 3 essays from students, again, real students. And of course, the essays were too long to fit on one PowerPoint slide. So these are excerpts. I've had to cut them down for size, but I think they still hold a lot of the true meaning and the ideas you'll get once you read them. So we're going to read through all 3. And then I'm going to have you actually vote. I'm curious to know which of the 3 excerpts of the essays you like best and why. So we'll do another poll at the end of this. So for this first one, I've named Cactus Fatality. I am not ashamed to say that 23 desert hardy houseplants spill over shelves and into crevices of my bedroom. While encompassing an array of shapes and sizes, they all lend themselves to the same name, succulents. A brief summation: succulents and cacti are plants with above average fleshiness, evolved to retain water in arid conditions. Common as houseplants might be, my emotions towards cacti indubitably vary from those of the average plant owner. My cacti, these succulents, are not mere mundane collectors of dust. They are Vivian, they are Oliver, they are Cleo, Calpurnia, Fitz, and Hera. And then I had to, of course, reduce this. So just insert a very traumatic cactus fatality, a fall from the 3rd floor bedroom window. And then the writer continues to talk about, to this day, sort of the lesson she learned, to this day, while fully recovered in health, Calpurnia maintains some battle scars. More important than those indentions is the imprint that this elastic quality resonated with me. Ideally, I could seamlessly surmount any challenge, but despite my best efforts, I cannot always emerge on top. And there are battles where, despite giving my all, success simply isn't within reach. Human nature is imperfection. I found that it is not a question of whether I fail, but rather how I cope with these inadequacies. And perhaps it took a desert succulent skydive for me to realize the answers with resilience. Our failures are not perpetually designed to define us. While we cannot ignore our faults, we also mustn't obsess over each minute failure. It is not the fall that determines who we are, who I am, but how we recover. And with a little work, we can rebound stronger than before. For our next excerpt, this one I have titled Wicked Witch of the West. And I've mainly included what is, in essence, sort of the first and last paragraph, with a little bit smushed in between. But all of these essays were around the 500 words to 650. This particular writer starts off with a pretty shocking first sentence, right? The first time I died, I was clad in a long black robe, complete with a pointy black hat and a fake wart, which had been subtly attached to the tip of my nose. Almost 200 people watched as I melted to the floor, murdered by a girl named Dorothy, who was armed with a deadly and dangerous weapon that was indeed a bucket of water. Having never read a script or set foot on stage in my life, but not one eager to stray away from the comfort zone of my friends, I auditioned for the school play alongside my usual pack of girlfriends. I was secretly plotting ways to sabotage my chances of getting a part that required doing more than standing on a discreet corner of the stage without speaking. And I never thought that the director, Miss Bennett, would discern what she apparently thought was major role material in a brown-haired 13-year-old introvert. But when the cast list went up a few days later, I felt violently sick to my stomach as I read my name printed next to my role as the Wicked Witch of the West. This particular student goes on to explain how she does, of course, succeed in her role and the lessons learned from going outside of her comfort zone. Our third example is about a wrestler who goes to Australia for a wrestling competition. This one always strikes some students when they see it because there's a lot of dialogue in it. And sometimes people are more used to sort of that traditional, what you would write for an English or history essay. But dialogue is perfectly okay. You can tell a story in whichever manner makes sense to you. So, wrestler in Australia. On our last night in Australia, we wandered down a side street in Sydney in the brash state of mind that seduces people to do things they'll later regret. And after months of self-discipline, our wrestling team was celebrating our first place finish. A grueling training and travel schedule had forged a tight bond among our team, and our victory added raucous energy. Plus, we were 10,000 miles from home, unchaperoned, and in a country that isn't hung up on concepts like parental consent. Matt, the 6'4" farm boy, paused outside a small, brightly lit shop. "Come on, mates," he drawled in an imitation Australian accent, which I can't do. "We're all getting tattoos." Inside, he leaned over me. "So what will it be, Jake? A great white," he grinned, "or a widow koala?" Mentally, I listed my reasons why I didn't want a tattoo. Number one, risk of medical complications like my tattooed arm being severed from my body by my mom. Number two, my mom permanently grounding the rest of me. Number three, needles. Number four, that old guy at the pool whose tattoos were faded, shriveled, and nasty. And number five, fear that someday people would point at me and say, "There goes that tattooed homeless man," instead of "There goes that well-groomed Nobel Prize winner." As my finger hovered between designs, I glanced out the window, noticing a shop across the street. "Know what?" I said. "There's something else I want, and I don't have enough cash left for both." As I started across the street towards the didgeridoo store, I realized that buying one was as impulsive and impractical as getting a tattoo, but it's a choice I'm glad I made. Like my body, my didgeridoo is on the small side and unadorned, and like me, it is powerful, distinctive, and good at bugging my little brother. By the way, some of the things that I cut out added some context to what a didgeridoo is. I definitely had to Google that the first time I read it. It is an instrument. So he provides some context at the end of his essay. So those were three different types of essays, all of which are very well done. These would be considered exceptional essays. And I think it's always helpful to see ones that do catch the eye of an admission counselor. And so now I want to ask you why you preferred one of those over the other. So I'm going to launch a poll and let me know if you preferred Cactus Fatality, Wicked Witch of the West, or The Wrestler in Australia. So everyone's voting on whether or not they preferred Cactus Fatality, Wicked Witch of the West, or Wrestler in Australia. About 75% have voted. I'll give it about 30 more seconds before I launch the results. Interestingly, it's almost even for all of them. All right, I'm going to share the results now. And so the votes came in with Cactus Fatality just nudging things out with 67 votes. So 39% of students preferred that. Wicked Witch of the West got 26% of the vote, and Wrestler in Australia received 35% of the vote. Now I'm curious why, and I kind of created some of the reasons I thought you might have chosen your essay, but as you reflect on what you liked best about your favorite essay, was it because of the topic they chose? Was it the writing style? Was it the humor? Or did it seem personable or relatable to you? And you might have actually felt like multiple one of these was the reasons that you liked it, but I only gave you the choice for one. All right, so over pretty strong results for writing style. That stood out as being one of the reasons that you liked it. 60 people, 35% voted that they chose the topic they chose because of the writing style. And close to it was that ability to be personable and relatable. So why is all of this important as we think about writing the college essay? Well, for one, it really isn't about the topic. It's not the topic that you choose to write about. Something like talking about your houseplants, your cacti in your bedroom is not something that people would typically consider to be a really profound essay. In fact, if it was done well because the writing style was so strong. The particular individual is just a master of the English language, to say the least, a much stronger writer than I would say most adults. And for the student, the wrestler in Australia, you really get a feel for his personality. He also seems to have mad respect for his mother, which is always a good thing to read. As a mother myself, I like to see that reflected in an essay, but I felt like I got to know the individual. And for our writer, the Wicked Witch of the West, she's talking about an event that happened to her in middle school, actually, in 8th grade. So again, not something that you would immediately jump to as an obvious choice for a college essay for Wicked Witch of the West, but it was obviously a very defining moment in her life, something that altered her own personality. And she describes it very well. Descriptive use of the language is always appreciated. And she did what we always kind of talk about, having that hook at the beginning of your essay, right? The first time I died, that sort of is slightly jarring when you see it, and it hooks you in because you're like, oh my goodness, what happened? I need to read the rest of this. Because I do want you to realize that for the majority of admission officers, while we hope to be able to spend as much time on your application as possible, probably the average applicant gets about 6 to 10 minutes of review, including your transcript, your recommendation letters, your essay. So whenever possible, you definitely want to really catch the reader's attention from the beginning. So here's some ideas I wanted to chat with you about as you start to develop your own ideas for your topic, or if you've already finished writing your Common App or Coalition App personal statement and you're thinking about supplemental essays. This is a really fun exercise, and I took this from a book, right? The best way to learn how to be a great writer is to read books. And I was doing a essay writing workshop here in the city of Richmond at a local public library. And during my writing workshop, of course, the librarian had brought out every single book that existed about how to write the college essay. Most of them read like manuals, and they were awful. But one book I picked up and started flipping through and kind of fell in love with it. So I have taken many of the concepts from it. And the name of the book is called Write Your Way In by Rachel Torr. And one of the brainstorming ideas that she would give to her students that she worked with was to make a list of 20 possible topics. And she said, the top 10 are probably going to be really obvious, probably cliche, frequently used, typical college essays. That last part of your list of 20 topics is where you're really digging down deep to try to figure out what to write. And that's where you get really weird and specific topics. So this is a list from her book. Number 1, basketball equals life. Number 2, my community service experience in a developing country where I learned poor people can be happy. Again, a very typical essay that we see. Number 4, I'm interested in both the sciences and the humanities. Number 8, I hate my little brother. So we're starting to get real personal. Number 11, I'm worried about garbage. 13, I love popping zits. 16, I keep locking my keys in my car. So you can see how again, sort of what the person is trying to come up with topics does get to become a little bit more personal, a little bit more interesting, and a little different, something that might help you figure out what you want to write about in that very short, 650 words. So this is the book that I was referring to, and there were some other really great examples and advice that she provided. And this is something you'll hear from everyone that's ever done a college essay workshop. After you write your essay, please read it out loud. That's where you're able to figure out mistakes that you've made, or you figure out like, hey, this doesn't actually sound like my voice. This is not how I would write, and trash it, go back, right? Stop thinking about writing in that very formal tone that you're used to doing in high school. You can be informal in your college essay. Again, this is you telling your story to an admission office. This is one of my favorite pieces of advice. The next one, paragraph breaks are your and your readers' best friends. The number of college essays that come to us that are all one large paragraph are very difficult to read. It also looks like you are not familiar with different techniques of writing styles. And sometimes this might be a copy and paste issue. So just make sure you check that on the back end and make sure that there are those paragraph breaks, because it makes it easier and faster for a reader to review your essay. And you usually need paragraph breaks. All good writing is vivid and specific. I think that's one of the reasons that those 3 essays stood out to me. You felt like you were there in the story being told. They gave very specific examples. It was just, for the cactus, it was one moment that happened in that person's life. The wrestler in Australia, one moment. It's easier sometimes to focus on something very small than trying to have this sort of macro view. And then the fourth one, which will be a little confusing unless you read more of the book, murder your darlings. And this is in reference to being okay with completely throwing away your first draft or completely cutting something that you thought was awesome. It requires multiple revisions. It's really good. Writing is rewriting, as Truman Capote said. You have to do multiple versions and keep chopping at it. Write a lot and shrink it down. And as you shrink it down, you know, the real big theme will emerge, and you'll be able to be sort of that short and sweet, right to the point in the word limits that you have. I think it's really hard to write short answers, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Another amazing resource that I love is the College Essay Guy. This is online. Everything is free, and he provides advice for writing your personal statement, writing supplemental essays. So those supplemental questions like why Richmond, even as specific as writing the supplement for University of California system, because they have a very specific one. Resumes, if you needed tips on, you know, including and writing out extracurricular activities on your resume, literally everything you could possibly imagine. This is a completely free resource. He is hilarious, really fast-paced type of videos if you wanted to watch it, but also spreadsheets and examples and things that you can look at and read through and peruse at your own time. So use these free online resources. The best thing you can do for yourself, of course, is to write your own essay. I feel like I shouldn't have to say that, but I really think it's important that you take the time to write your essay and you take the time to do the revisions and use these awesome resources to find some ways to stand out. So some basic advice and tips in your writing. Always stay positive. A lot of these prompts ask you to talk about a time you might have been challenged. It's important, even when you're talking about a subject that might be a little bit heavy, to try to stay positive. And in particular, if you've been confronted with a challenge, how did you actually solve it? You don't want to just say, this was a challenge I faced, and not explain to us how you overcome it. So it's really important to stay positive and solve the problem if that's something you've addressed within your essay. Be authentic. Again, you should write it. It should sound like you. Make sure it sounds like you. Do not use big words because you think they're impressive for us to hear. Write how you would speak, right? You want to make sure that it sounds like a 17, 18-year-old and not a 40-year-old writing a college essay. Know your audience. This is just a reminder that you don't know who is reading your application. And so always be cautious of that, right? You might not know who is reading your essay. You don't know their personal backgrounds or beliefs. And so it's always a good idea to maybe steer away from topics that might be slightly controversial, and to just be aware that you don't know who is reading your application. So try to stay neutral. Proofread, and proofread again. I purposely misspelled those so that y'all would notice the errors. We notice grammar errors, we notice spelling. Again, this is the one thing that you have complete control over. So remember to make sure you take the time to make sure that everything looks perfect. But it's not just that personal statement on the Common Application. There's also some school-specific supplements. Plus, they added a question, an optional question about COVID-19 this year. So just to go over that, if you haven't been in the Common Application or Coalition to see that, I wanted to show you what it was. So the optional question for COVID-19 this year says, community disruptions such as COVID-19 and natural disasters can have deep and long-lasting impacts. And if you need it, this space is yours to describe those impacts. Colleges care about the effects on your health and well-being, safety, family circumstances, future plans, and education, including access to reliable technology and quiet study space. Do you wish to share anything on this topic? I love that, you know, the Common Application and Coalition realized that they needed to provide the space for you. I don't want you to use that personal statement to talk about COVID. It's obviously upended your lives and will continue to have a long and lasting impact. But everyone is going through COVID-19. So this is a space, if you've had to experience, if something has happened to you that goes above and beyond what you would consider sort of the norm, to be able to talk about if there's been illness or hardship, emotional, financial, if you've had changes to your extracurricular activities that you really feel like you need to explain, disruptions to consistent participation. I mean, we know that it has caused a lot of changes to your lives. So they've added this. It's only 250 words max. So you'll want to kind of get straight to the point and be succinct, but it does provide you a space there. So use that instead of your personal statement to write about things that might have been impacted. Your school official, either your counselor, maybe a teacher, but usually your counselor will have an opportunity in the secondary school report form to then talk about what your high school did. So if your high school said you can choose your grade or you can do pass fail, if your school year ended in March, if there was in-person versus remote, the school official will be able to outline all of that. So you will not need to explain that in your application. It should be covered by your school official. So keep that in mind. But now there's all of those fun supplemental essays. So get really excited. You finally finish your Common App essay, and then you click on the schools you're applying to, and your jaw drops when you realize that we're asking you to write maybe one, maybe 5 more. So stay organized, start early. It's again, there's a purpose, right? Again, we want to get to know you, and each school has specific supplement questions, and that can give you some insight into the type of student they're trying to attract to their university. One of the just most well-known and I consider most brilliant essay prompts every year comes from the University of Chicago. And historically, they've been doing a great job. And they actually ask for their students and their alumni to submit essay topics. So here's an example for this year. They have 2 required essays at Chicago and 10, 12 different options for you to choose from. So this one was, do you feel lucky? Well, do you, punk? Eleanor Roosevelt, which is not right. Misattribute a famous quote and explain the implications of doing so. That's pretty cool. Wake Forest has been having some of these for a long time. They always ask students to include their top 5 books. You have to list your top 5 books and why, kind of a short response there. They do 3 short answers, so I think 200, maybe 200 words. A top 10 list. Give us your top 10 list and include a theme name. I remember working with a student. I was in college counseling for a year, and I was working with a student, and we just kind of sat down. I was like, well, what do you like? And he really wanted to do marine biology. And so he ended up doing his top 10 sharks. But they want to see how creative you are. They'll also include another essay. The University of Notre Dame requires 3 short responses, max of 200 words each. So again, it's not always a full-length essay. Sometimes it's those shorter responses, which I think can be a little bit harder to write. For this one option, they had a couple of options. A Notre Dame education is not just for you, but also for those who will benefit from the impact you make. Who do you aspire to serve after you graduate? I think that really is very telling of their commitment, of course, the religious background of Notre Dame being a Catholic school, to talk about service and how you might serve others. Barnard College, I use this example to show the why Barnard. The why, fill in the college blank. What factors encouraged your decision to apply to Barnard, and why do you think the college would be a good match for you? The reason that universities ask you these types of questions is they want to make sure that you've actually spent time doing research to figure out if our college is really, in essence, where you want to apply. It's to measure your level of interest. And we can tell when we read essays how much time a student might have spent on this, how much research they might have done. You definitely want to go beyond what you would find in a college guidebook when you're explaining why you chose a university to apply to. It's going to require you to maybe bop around and really think about why that particular university is the place you want to call home. You know, have you looked at academic programs? Have you even read class descriptions? Have you read about a professor's research project? Have you discovered, you know, what students do in their clubs and organizations? This is where you're really showcasing how interested you are with a particular university. Richmond, these are our supplemental essay options. You only have to write one more essay for Richmond, and we have 3 topics that you can choose from. The first one, what is an urgent global challenge, social justice topic, or racial injustice issue about which you are passionate? What solutions or outcomes do you hope to see? This was a very popular option chosen last year. Number 2, by the time you graduate from college, there will be jobs that don't exist today. Describe one of them and how Richmond might prepare you for it. And number 3, you're required to spend the next year in either the past or the future. To what year would you travel and why? Number 3, when we first unveiled these questions, was by far the most popular. And number 2 has remained the least popular. But we really want you to choose the prompt that resonates with you. So don't overthink that. Go with your gut. Whichever one you like the most, pick it. Again, do that research about University of Richmond, write about how you'll impact our community, and don't, here's some basic tidbits, but it's true. We definitely receive this sometimes. Don't repeat your Common App essay. Every year we have students that use the same essay for both sections, which feels a little bit like a slap in the face, because we want you to spend a little bit of extra time telling us more about you. That's why we're asking for more information. Another big piece of advice, don't name another university. This has happened since the beginning of history. It's important to make sure that you're really just never include a university's name if you don't have to, but to make sure if you do recycle or upcycle, that's okay. I know that you might have 10 or 15 different essays to use, and you might find prompts being very similar and you're able to use sort of the same essay for different schools. So just be really, really careful that as you are adapting an essay that you're using potentially for another university, that you don't inadvertently leave the name of another university in there. And then of course, don't forget to submit it. There are 2 steps to submitting an application. One is the actual Common App part, and then the school-specific part does require you to hit a submission button a second time. So keep that in mind. Just double check that everything's greened out in your Common App or coalition to say that you've submitted it. So those are some of my words of wisdom tonight. Austin Kelso has been helping me behind the scenes answer some of the questions. And now if you have any additional questions that you would like to ask me now, I'll be happy to answer those live. We have about 10 minutes before the end of the program. So I'm going to start with the first one, the first question. Should the COVID statement be in a similar essay style to the main essay or just simple statements? I think there's a lot of flexibility for this. I don't think it has to be essay style or prose. I could imagine some students doing bullet points. There is no required formatting for the COVID statement this year. So I think with that limited of 250 words, attack it as it makes sense to you. It could be a list form. You might decide to continue to still write it in an essay, but that can be up to you. Another question offered was, do you have any advice on how to make your essay longer? Most essays must be at least 500 words, and I'm having a hard time getting my essay to that point, even after revisions. Ooh, this is tricky. You don't necessarily want, I can't remember how my English teacher called them, flavor words maybe, you know, and we would add just adverbs and adjectives to try to lengthen it. You know, that's one that I would probably bounce around some ideas with my friends and figure out, like, is there something that you're missing? You know, reading it out loud, like, is there anything else, any more details that you might be able to add? If there is a minimum. Most universities don't have a minimum. And sometimes if you're able to do it, like, I don't want students to feel as if they have to reach that maximum. If you've said what you need to say, then if that minimum is hit, then you should be fine. To be honest, we don't count words. Nobody notified, there's no like red light flashing that says this person didn't meet the minimum number of words. So we would never really know. So I wouldn't worry too much about it, but I would say bounce some ideas off of some friends. Oh, one question. Will this slideshow be emailed to us? If not, can it be? We are planning to upload this onto our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to rewatch it. We hadn't talked about emailing out the slides, but you'll be able to go back onto YouTube and click through to reach the slides that you wanted to see. How creative can we get with UR's prompts, and what style should it be in? You can be very creative with the prompts. I'll give you an example. As I mentioned, the one about traveling to the future or the past for a year was really popular last year and the year before. So we had one student kind of write as if it was almost written as if it was a novel, sort of a fictional piece of work of them being, I can't remember, so with Joan of Arc, it was some historical figure that they were hanging out with. So you can definitely be creative with the prompts. Have fun with them. I know that the writing is not going to be, again, unless you're a writer, the writing of the college essays and the supplements will not be your favorite. So it's okay to have fun with it and try to enjoy it as much as possible. Oh, this is a great question. How do you talk about COVID-19 hardships without being overly pessimistic? To be honest, it's okay to be a little bit pessimistic in this situation. Be real and let your feelings come through. I think that's okay in this time because we're obviously all human. And if that's how you're feeling at that time, I think it can be important. So in the personal statement, try to be a little bit more optimistic maybe, but it's okay to let that shine through. Does the admission department get upset if I recount a terrible experience that I experienced as a kid? No, we don't get upset. I will say that throughout the reading season, I do both laughing and crying alongside of your writing. Your writing it can be very emotional, and again, that's what we want students to showcase themselves and their personality. And so if you are having to tell a story that is a little bit more difficult, it won't upset us. It's something that you've chosen to share with us. And so, I want you to showcase to us what you feel is important, something that might define you. And so, yes, you may write about an experience. What are some good places to look to help write a college's Why Us essay? For this one, the college essay guy is probably the best one. He's got a lot of great examples for the Why Us. Oh, Benton asked, did the 3 students who wrote the example essays get accepted? Well, some of these essays are from a very long time ago. The wrestler one, oh my gosh, you guys were babies, literally, probably was written in 2004. So I don't know. The Cactus Fatality is my most recent collection, and that particular individual did get admitted and was actually also awarded merit scholarship. Here's a question about when it asks about honors or recognitions, would that include being inducted into the National Honor Society? So this is something that'll fall under not your essay, but in your list of honors. And yes, National Honor Society will fall under that. Should you use a personal essay to elaborate on an activity that you're passionate about and have spent a lot of time on? Oh, this is good. So there's sort of this balance. If you have an activity that you're passionate about, and I'll use that example from the list, like basketball is my life. I want to make sure that you don't come across as one-sided in your essay. So if, for example, that student who loved basketball, maybe all of their extracurricular was playing basketball or coaching basketball, doing community service with basketball, their teachers are writing about their basketball talent. In that particular situation, I probably would prefer the student to talk about something other than basketball, because they start to come across as just having one little sort of niche spot. So it can vary, but I think if it can also work at the same time. So I don't have a real solid answer for you. Sometimes, yes, maybe is my best answer tonight. What's the most common problem you see in application essays? And how have you seen students grow in classes once they're accepted as compared to once they're admitted? Oh, I don't get to see students sort of in that light, but most common problems, I would say lately, and maybe it's because you are doing some of this over your phones, but we're noticing sometimes a lack of capitalization, spacing. Again, formatting can be off, and I don't know if that's because things are copied and paste or done over a phone and being filled out. So sometimes those can have a little bit of sort of trouble. As far as like topics chosen, most students write about the same things. Why? Because you're all the same age and you've had most of the same experiences. So it's okay to have a similar topic that you write about, because again, you're only 16, 17, 18 years of age. And it's, again, not necessarily about the topic. You can write about a very cliche topic, but if you're a great writer, that'll really show through. What makes a great Richmond supplement? And how do you balance diving into the topic and the why I want to go to campus or why I want to go to Richmond? That's a great question. For our supplement, some of the prompts really do ask you to reflect on why Richmond. I would say for the future past one, that's one where you probably wouldn't need to talk about Richmond in it. So there's a balance on those prompts. So it would be okay to not talk about Richmond in the future past prompt. But if it's the question that you're answering about a job that doesn't exist now, then you'll definitely need to include some nods to Richmond and how you would impact campus. Do you have any advice? This is a flip side of making your essay longer. Flip side, any advice on how to make your essays short enough? Yeah, that's just going to require a lot of revisions, a lot of chopping off things. One other piece of advice that I've read before is to write your essay and then completely delete it and start over again, which I think sounds too scary. I don't know if I would have been brave enough to do that. And the thinking behind that is that your main points have had time to stew in your brain. And when you kind of revisit it from a fresh perspective, a blank page, new things might emerge. So maybe try scrapping an entire essay and starting over again. But yeah, that's a tough one. Is it possible to change your Common App essay in between submissions to different schools? I don't actually know. I don't know. I don't think so. But I would have to look into Common App. Again, guys, it's been a while since I applied to college, and I still had to mail in a paper application. So that would be a good question maybe for your counselor. Should I be writing positive outcomes for the COVID response, or is it only if something very unusual happened to you? Oh, that's actually an interesting question. The COVID optional question is giving you a chance to talk about things that might have been very disruptive for you. But could you add something about maybe a positive outcome? Yeah, yes, definitely. I mean, this is space for you to use as you need to use it. And I think that would be perfectly okay. This is an unusual year in admission. And I think I've been recommending to students like overshare. The more information we have, the better we can make a decision. So as much as you want to include more and more information, please do so. So you could use it for positive. How do I know if my hook in my essay is too artificial? I think, again, some of these resources like College Essay Guy and the Write Your Way In book, they do include some information in a chapter in the book on like how to not sound too fake when creating a hook. You do have to be careful on it. It needs to not be obvious. Again, that's going to you just need to bounce ideas off of other people to get an idea of like, hey, does this work? What did you think? So whether it's a teacher, again, a classmate, sharing that. I'm sure there's probably some online boards, Reddit or something that you might even be able to do that too, get some other people's opinions. But always go with your gut, right? You can listen to other people's opinions, but ultimately you're the best judge of whether or not something feels right to you. How do you think you can balance formal writing versus writing in your own voice? this is part of the maturity of writing and figuring out like what does work and what doesn't. I think when you think of sort of the informal writing aspect of it, just try not to get too informal, right? You're not talking to a best friend, you're not sending a text. So you want to maintain a certain level of formality because, again, you don't know your audience, you don't know who's reading your essay. So important to keep that up. We have had some really, really amazing questions, but unfortunately, we have reached the end of our time. I'm going to answer one more question, so I'm going to browse through to see my favorite and answer that one. But we are, Austin has been helping behind the scenes answer some of the questions, so I hope that has helped you as well. And we're always available. You can shoot me an email or your Richmond counselor, who you've probably received an email or 3 from at this point. And we're happy to help answer more questions and continue to help you figure out the right thing to do for choosing your essay topics. So how much do you think the personal statement and college-specific essay each count in the overall decision process? This is a good question. Everyone always asks, well, how much does the essay matter? The most important aspects of your application are going to be focused on your academic record and your extracurriculars, the things that you've spent the majority of your time working on, right? We're looking to see how well you would fit into the academic environment. So we spend a lot of time on the transcript. We look at your extracurriculars and your recommendation letters to get to know who you are and how you would contribute to our campus. And so the essay kind of adds in that layer of sort of that personal background and how you fit onto our campus. Do you share some of the same values and goals? So I would say that an essay won't make or break an application. The student's academic ability is probably going to be at the forefront. But where essays can start to have an even bigger lasting impression might be things like merit scholarships. It might be when a student is kind of right on that margins of, they could be an admit, they could be a wait list, and a really strong essay might push them to an admit. So it doesn't usually overcome everything in an application, but it can definitely have an impact for students. And I would say in particular, when University of Richmond is looking for Richmond scholars, those essays and those supplement essays play a huge role when we're trying to select from among the best of the best, where all students look extraordinary. How do you separate the extraordinary? And sometimes it can come down to that writing. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to spend time with you. I wish we could do this in person, but maybe in 6 months, we will be back open to visitors and able to see one another. So I hope you enjoyed it. Have a wonderful evening, and thanks for joining.